Hey guys, Frank here. Welcome in our studio in Emmeloord. Today, a quick tip about building anxiety in your shots. Did I really say anxiety? I of course meant excitement. Now, one of the things that we of course love to do in our studio is create contrast in your images. Because let's be honest, you can use a big softbox on your model and it looks great, but it isn't exciting. It isn't that piece where you go and you're shot and you go like, oh, I really like this. And that's where shadows come in. Shadows are so incredibly important in an image. I always say it's the soul of a shot. So don't forget to include your shadows. Now today we're going to create a black and white image. And you might say like, hey, the model is not wearing black and white. She's wearing something that's very bright in colors. Absolutely true. Now when you shoot black and white, you're not shooting black and white on film. You're still shooting black and white on your camera. So this is why in my mind I'm really shooting black and white. But I always leave that option open to create something in color. Because let's be honest, if you could create a killer shot in color, why not use it in color? You're not supposed to be fixated on it has to be black and white, it can't be anything else. Be open for the possibilities. So we're going to use one strobe on our model. It's my flash bender on a GT250 from Gigoto. And we're aiming that under a slight angle at our model. This means that we get a very narrow beam of light hitting our model, creating a lot of contrast, not a lot of light on the backdrop, and one very, very dark side of the model. This can work great if you're shooting against the light or if you're shooting close up. So let's just take some shots with only that main light source. So we're going to turn off channel B because we're going to add something later. And let's just take some shots of only that flash bender. As you can see here, very nice quality of light, really shaping the model. And it still gives you more than enough light for a quarter body. It hits a little bit on the backdrop, creating a very nice vignetting. So I absolutely love those shots. And the only thing that you have to realize is that we have to make sure that we also make it interesting. So let's move around a little bit. So let's shoot into the light, for example. There we go. Now you also know why I'm not using any sun hoods on my camera at the moment. Because I'm using a little bit of lens flare. You can even crop the strobe out, move a little bit here. And then you have a little bit less lens flare. But I just love that lens flare in there. Let's do a close up. Ooh, really love this. Nice. Now with black and white I always try to overexpose slightly. So with color I will use a light meter, of course also with black and white. But with color I will try to aim it straight at 5.6 and then I'm shooting on 5.6. With black and white I sometimes have the attitude to not shoot on 5.6 but set the strobes on 5.62, maybe 5.63, so third stop higher to create a little bit more of that highlights. Now of course you can do that later in Photoshop. But let's be honest, if you do it on the set, you immediately on your screen see the end result. I might wonder, do you see your end result on the screen? Yes. One of the cool tricks that you can do in Lightroom, Capture One or any other software is use a preset. So when you have difficulty figuring out like, hey, how is this gonna look in black and white? You're just gonna create a preset in Lightroom or Capture One. And you just create the image in black and white the way that you think like, okay, maybe the final result will look like this. And then you just say every new image that comes in, you use this preset. So now you're going to see all your images coming in black and white. And that sometimes really helps. But now when I look at the shot, I go like, yeah, it looks nice, but I really want something extra. I want some oomph in my shot. So that's why we actually use a second strobe. Now, the second strobe on the side is using a dome. And the dome is an omnidirectional light source. In this case, we're using the magnetic system from Rogue. And the dome, behind the dome, we actually have a blue gel. So the dome is omnidirectional. We have a blue gel behind it, creating not only light hitting my sensor, in other words, creating lens flare, but also via the sides hitting my model. Now, the nice thing about the dome, as you can see in this image, is that it's round. And it means that the center part will get a lot of light output. And the more you go to the sides, the less the light intensity will be. So that means that if I aim the dome directly at my camera, with a normal strobe, I wouldn't hit my model anymore, because all the light will be aimed at my camera. And it makes creating that accent light and that lens flare just a little bit more difficult than when you use an omnidirectional light source. So let's turn on that dome, and let's go. And of course we metered everything before we started. So let's see how that looks. So I have to make sure that I see the dome in my camera and then just crop it out a little bit, and then you have the maximum amount of lens flare. And as you can see, that blue really just adds that nice dimension to your shot. Let's do it under an angle, and you can see that the lens flare is a lot less, but now it's more like an accent light. Now, if you want it as an accent light, I would highly recommend to go to that B channel and just lower it a full stop. Because then you have that more subtle light. Ooh, this looks really nice. But then as soon as you go like, okay, now it has to be powerful again, you just open up. Let's do a lot. Let's do 2 stops extra. Let's be dangerous today. And let's just shoot the image. And there we go. That's nice. Cool. Really love those shots. Okay. Now so using that extra accent light will give me something to work with. I can create it in black and white, but I can also leave it in color. So I think the challenge now would be, let's go into Lightroom. We're not going to use Photoshop. We're going to keep it simple. Go into Lightroom and create something stunning in color and black and white. Are you ready? Let's go to the computer. Hey guys, I made a selection of 3 images, and let's just look at those images. So we have this one as a portrait, and we have this one with a little bit of lens flare from the left, and we have one with all the colors and the big lens flare. So first let's go for black and white. Now I want to keep it very simple, so we're not going to do any skin retouching, and Lois already has great skin, so don't over smoothen stuff if you don't need it. So you can do a few things in Lightroom, and let's just go through some of the things that I love to do. So let's first go for black and white. Now as you can see, it takes out the color and it just doesn't look right for me. It looks a little bit boring. And with black and white, I just love to have high contrast. So let's start with bumping up that contrast. And you already see that that image now get that really nice stark look. You can even choose to underexpose just slightly to give it a little bit more of a rough edge. The thing is, I think the shadows are now a little bit clogged up, so I hope that's the right expression, but you know what I mean, right? It just is too black. So let's open up the shadows just a little bit, but not too much. Now, as soon as you see like, hey, that backdrop is also coming up, that's for me a nice thing, because that gives me separation. So if you want to open up this a little bit more, just go for your brush and for your local adjustments, and you can always just open it up a little bit. There's no shaming in doing it, right? You did a proper setup, the image looks right, but in the conversion, you can always just change some stuff, because we're bumping up the contrast so much that the shadows will actually block. Now, the thing is, if you expose it correctly, you can always bring that detail back, because you're working in a RAW file. Now, if you try to get this look straight out of the camera with that high contrast, you might run into the risk that you can't recover any shadows. So my preference is actually to shoot it as flat as possible and then bring the contrast in later. So as we did here. Now, of course, in black and white, we still have our color channels, because we only see the colors red, green and blue. Now, the nice thing about Lightroom, and of course also Photoshop, is that you can still manipulate those colors. Now, you can choose to do it in curves, and you can of course choose to do it for the whole image. Sorry, I'm still in my local adjustments, of course. So let's close that first. Okay, so you can do it in curves, and you can do it locally. Globally, excuse me. So on all colors, but you can also do it per color. And now you get a little bit of the tinting in your image, as you can see here. Now, this is the part that I don't want to do. So let's go back for that. The thing that I do like to do is actually what's underneath here. So this is what we use for color manipulation. So for example, creating a cross-processed look or giving some colors a little bit more of a funky look. This is the part that we use in black and white photography. And as you can see here, we see way more than red, green and blue. And that's because we also have secondary colors, and those are all connected. Now the cool thing about this is that we can still change the whole look of your image. So we already like this, but let's say we want a little bit more red enhancement. As you can see here, that can actually manipulate the shadow. So if you like it dark under a chin, leave it like this. If you like to open it up just a little bit, just do that with a red channel. And there you go. I really like this. The orange, that's always a little bit in the hair, of course, if somebody is Caucasian and blonde. So you have a little bit in the face and in the hairs. So you can make a nice balance of that. Yellow, of course, also in the backdrop. So there we go. This is without any separation. Look at the right bottom. And there you see it opening up. And I like a little bit of separation in my model. So I open it up just slightly. As you can see here, we just have some slight enhancements there, which I really like. Green is probably only in the backdrop if there's any green. There isn't, so then leave it on 0. Aqua, there's nothing. I always go through all these sliders just to see like, hey, if there's something in there. This is her jacket, of course, so let's give that blue just a little bit more. There we go. Then the purple also in the jacket, a little bit. And magenta. It is probably to fine tune. Yes, there we go. Now be very careful here. As you can see, this looks nice, but as soon as you open this up, you can get some really nasty artifacts. And in this case, it's okay, but always beware that when you play with those color channels and you do it more extreme, you can get some really nasty artifacts. I think overall, I really like this look. You could add some vignetting if it was a light backdrop. In this case, it doesn't make any sense because it's a darker backdrop. Now you can do a few things. You can of course go like, hey, okay, select everything and go for sync. And just sync everything, and there we go. That's not the way that I would do it, to be honest. I would literally go for image 1, image 2, and as you can see here, it doesn't make any sense. It looks totally wrong. So let's do photo and then a reset, sorry. So let's do this one manually, and let's see if we get something different. So go for black and white. Let's bump the contrast, open up the shadows in this case. Maybe lower the highlights just a little bit because I want a little bit more detail in the shadows. So I'm going to lower the highlights. And by lowering the highlights, I can actually open up the exposure a little bit more, as you can see here. Don't overdo it because you get something like that fake HDR look. And in this case, I really mean highly destructive retouching. So we have to make sure that we find a balance. And I think the balance is pretty much here. Still have enough separation. I love the black and white look. It's really stark. The only thing I don't like is the composition. I would prefer to have the model a little bit more to the side, but when I'm filming and explaining, I sometimes forget my composition, so sorry for that, guys. Now you can see here that we have a little bit of a lens flare, which I actually like, but I don't like to see some of my backdrop. Of the studio here, because the backdrop, of course, ended approximately here. So we still have a lot of stuff here. Now in that case, you can go here, and you can go for your linear gradient. And just draw a line, and I would personally just do it a little bit under an angle. See if we can save just a little bit here. There we go. Make sure that you don't hit the model, and then just drop the exposure all the way down. There you go. And at that point, you have a really nice dark area here. You're losing your lens flare, of course. And there are many software solutions that can bring that lens flare back. For example, Doorhof FX, or you can go into Photoshop and try to do it there with, for example, layers or blurring a white area. But in this case, we want to keep it in Lightroom, so I want to keep it simple. And I didn't like that side here, so I just closed that up with my selective adjustments, which I absolutely love in Lightroom, of course. Okay, so let's go for the final image in black and white. This one worked okay, I think. If you compare it to the second one, which was absolutely horrible, this one we can work with. So this one we can just adjust a little bit. There we go, and just lower your highlights here. Now in this case, we have some junk over here. We can use the clone or a remove tool or a healing tool or whatever. In this case, we're just going to crop it out. There we go. Leave a little bit of that lens flare in, and there you go. So for the black and white versions, I would keep it like this. Really stark, really high contrast, and they have to jump off your screen. But let's say that we want to keep it in color. So let's do reset all settings. Also go here, reset all settings. And let's do this one. And there's probably an easier way to do it. I just realized. Okay, so what would I do when I keep it in color? Now, I really like that blue. So I think for color, I would actually prefer to add just a little bit of contrast, lowering the highlights just a little bit. And then I would immediately go into vibrance and just see how far I can push the blue without overdoing the reds in the skin. And there you go. So I think for a color image, this already works really great. But I always want something special in my images. I don't want them to look like they come straight out of the camera. With a little bit of adjustment, I actually like to do a little bit more. And this is again where you can work with your HSL, hue, saturation and luminance. And this is such a powerful tool. So let's say, for example, I really like that blue. So go for blue and you can change the saturation. And you can do way more. You can, for example, also change the hue a little bit, depending on what you want. So you can literally just go into your color channels. Now here the reds are a little bit too much, and I will always try to find it the easy way just by clicking it. You can of course also do a local adjustment, but in this case, mostly with model photography, you don't have to go into the custom. You just go into what you already have and it works like a charm. Okay, now in this case, I think we're gonna do a little bit of a vignette, just see how it looks. And that just closes up the sides for me a little bit too much. So I love vignetting, in this case I'm not gonna do it. So I now balance my colors and I really like what I see, but it doesn't have that special look. So let's first try it with curves. Let's go for the red channel and take that out in the shadows. There we go. Looks terrible, right? So let's put it back into the skin tones a little bit. There we go. So now we have a little bit of a green hue, and that's of course because we see a lot of green and we're not that sensitive for blue and red. So let's go for green. Let's just take that out just a little bit. There we go. Now it's very subtle, but it just gives your image a totally different look. And you can always store this as a preset. Now as you can see, I have a lot of presets here, and they are all, and of course they don't work all perfectly on every shot. As you can see, I just store those presets, and normally I will use one of my own presets as a base and then work from those presets. And you can see a lot of black and white, but most of all when we go into the more creative stuff, it's a lot of tinting. And again, it's meant for landscape photography, for model photography, so a lot of those presets look absolutely like crap on a model photography shot, but hey, you get my idea, right? So I would do it like this, and then maybe for this shot, maybe we want something completely different. Let's go for a little bit more of a desaturated look and just lower the vibrance and the saturation. There we go. And then just maybe pump up that blue in the coat and maybe a little bit in the red. There we go. And then bring back the vibrance first until you see what you like, and then bring back the saturation in that order. There we go. Now if you still think, oh, that red is a little bit too dark, you can always go into your red channel and go for luminance. And you can literally just open up that red. And in my case, I also like to open up the blue just a little bit. And there you go. So let's go for the final shot. This one. For this one, I want something really stark. I'm totally gonna change the look of my shot. So I'm gonna go first for a crop. There we go. And now in this case, let's just do something really weird. Let's just open up the shadows a lot. Let's lower the highlights. There we go. Let's bump the contrast. Let's open up the exposure. There we go. And you already see that the model now really pops out. It's really straight in your face. So let's do that a little bit more. Let's give it some highlights. Lower the exposure. It's a little bit too bright now for me. There we go. And of course you can also change your color temperature. Now of course when we shoot with color checkers, we make a proper white balance. We didn't do it in the video, but we always create a profile with of course a calibrated color checker. But it doesn't mean that you can't change the color temperature for special effects. And this is one of the things why I always tell people use a color checker and use a profile. Because when you use a color checker and a profile, your base is always correct. And it means that every single preset that you create on that base will work on every single image. If you shoot it on the tungsten, if you shoot it on the fluorescent or in daylight, it doesn't matter. If your white balance is set up correctly and you use a profile, you can use your presets on every single shot. And that takes out a lot of guesswork, especially when you're on location, you're working on a laptop and you don't have that proper monitor. You can still create great images, but do check them as soon as you're home, of course. Because a laptop, you can change the brightness, and that sometimes really messes up your idea of retouching. If you have the brightness of the laptop a little bit too low, you are actually making your images way too bright. If you have your laptop a little bit too high, you end up with too dark images. So that's why I highly recommend also when you do a laptop calibration is always lower your light output, for example on a MacBook Pro. Remember where it was set up, that it feels comfortable for your eyes, and then do the proper calibration. And after that, just remember where the setting on your laptop was. And make sure you work in an area where you have light control, of course. So you don't have a lot of light where you have to look at your laptop and go like, oh, I really need to bump up the contrast. Now, controlled lighting, no light hitting your screen, and make sure that you remember where the setting was when you calibrated. So let's change the color balance for effect. So I want a little bit more blue in there. Let's just mess it up completely, like going for a little bit underwater look. Okay, the green is way too obvious now, so we're going to take that out. There you go. And I get some, and again, it's very subtle, but do you see that the blue just really shines? It gives you a little bit of an underwater look. And you can even push that further into, for example, the reds. And that I don't like. I really want to go this side, a little bit in that more surreal look. Really cool. And I think it fits very well with the model and her clothing here. Okay, so there we go. So this was just very simple. Normally, of course, we take a lot more time in figuring out how I want an image to look, what is the story that I want to tell, and that kind of stuff. But just to show you very quickly what you can do in Lightroom, I think is interesting. And in this case, let's do a little bit of skin retouching, right? Because I know some guys really like to see that. So what I do with skin retouching in Lightroom is actually go for your local adjustments, go for your brush, and don't make it too big. And I don't believe in automatic selection, so I will normally just do it myself, especially in Lightroom. And I don't say that Lightroom is bad, but I always say that I want to make my own selection. Okay, now for the video, this is okay for now. Don't overdo it. You can always go to 400%, for example. And there we go. Now, what I want to do is, the first thing I want to do is want to make sure that we don't see any of those pores in the model. So let's go for your details here, your texture, and let's start with texture at 0 and your clarity at 0. Now you can see that it looks like a Barbie doll. And I know Barbie is totally in at the moment, but we don't want our models to look like Barbie. Now, we both of them down, and clarity will give you, I always say clarity is a little bit my contrast slider. It's not, but makes it easier to remember. So I have them both on 0. Now I start to add texture. Up to the point where I go like, okay, now I see skin, but I don't see a lot of skin, and I don't see a lot of defects. So this looks pretty nice. And now I bring back my clarity to give it a more natural oomph and pop. And there you go. You can even use dehaze if you want to give it a little bit more contrast, or just open up the shadows. In this case, let's not do it too much. I like the adding of a little bit of blue here, so that's why I use clarity here. Dehaze. The only thing I now have to do is go into my local healing and then go into that little area up here, and I want to take that out because that's not something that I like. So let's change the brush. I'm doing this on my laptop. Normally we use a drawing tablet, of course, but in this case, let's do it on the laptop, so it's a little bit slower. Let me see. We can try the healing brush first and just see what Lightroom creates. As you can see with the healing brush, you can still move around wherever you want. And I think the healing brush does it okay, but we don't have enough space here. So let's not do the healing brush. Let's choose for remove. I just want to show you what we do. In the end, we end up with the healing brush, I can already tell you. So this works great too, but in this case it actually works. Normally with skin, the removing, I don't know, it's hit and miss. Now, of course, you can also use the clone tool. And the clone tool works a little bit like the healing brush, but it's a little bit more obvious. So I would never use the clone tool here, because as you can see here, it's great for patterns, but in skin, even if you use your feathering, most of the times it's, again here it works, but it's a little bit hit and miss. So what do I normally do? Okay, so we saw a few that actually worked. So that's great, of course. Let's go back. Okay. So I will go for the healing brush. I will use a lot of feathering, as you can see here. And I will just very gently first start in the center. And then I will just find a space where it intersects just a little bit. And that's why I use that feathering. So I want to make sure that it fits nicely. And I'm just looking at the lines in her forehead, as you can see here, and try to get those really nice in line. There we go. And I'm really looking at this line. So I want to make that continuous. So it doesn't look like I did some retouching. And as you can see here, that looks pretty convincing, especially when you go for fit. And for Lightroom, that looks pretty good, right? Okay, let's head back to the studio and let's conclude this video for you guys. And as you can see, it's really easy in Lightroom to just do some adjustments. The black and white, it really screams high contrast, but the color version, yeah, I'm still in doubt which one I like most. Let's just use them both. That's the nice thing about digital photography.